Heuristics.
Whoa, we did a video on that already.
Heuristics. Yeah, we talked about heuristics and magic already, but we're going to talk about heuristics more generally in this video. And I will warn you before we hop into it that this might get a little crunchy. We're going to try to make it as easy to follow as possible.
Distraction makers.
First, let's define what heuristics are, and then we can start talking about their implications in both game design or the implications for players and designers.
Heuristics, generally, simple terms, rules of thumb of a game. It's not the actual rules of a game.
Yeah. It's a fancy word for rule of thumb.
Right. So in our magic video, we talk about bolting the bird as if you have the card lightning bolt. You can either hit someone's face or you can hit a birds of paradise. It's a big conundrum that the magic community has talked about. But if we're talking about more generalized game heuristics, two very basic forms of heuristics that we'll be kind of calling back to throughout the video. And that's positional heuristics and directional heuristics.
Positional heuristics refers to you understanding the game state and how close you or your opponent is to winning the game. And directional heuristics are sort of downstream heuristics from positional, a rule of thumb that is, well, in this situation, I act this way. And the best example of this is probably the game Yahtzee.
Explain Yahtzee right now. 30 seconds, go.
All right, so you roll 6 dice?
Nope, wrong. All right.
How many dice is it?
It might be.
All right, so you roll a certain amount of dice, and you're trying to score. It's sort of like poker hands a bit, like you're trying to get like 6 of a kind, or is it 5 of a kind? 5 dice? Right. Whatever. You're trying to get like, if you roll all, 5 threes or 6 threes, however many dice there are. Anyway, so the heuristics come in when you understand whether you're winning or losing the game. So positional heuristics here are pretty clear because all you really need to do is
a little scorecard.
You know how many points you have versus your opponents. So there isn't really any kind of heuristics that get developed positionally. But okay, well, I'm behind, so that means I should play more risky. And that's sort of a zero level heuristic for Yahtzee.
Right. If you were to keep playing the normal way that you normally would go, you'd have to hope that someone else would get like unlucky and get behind or something like that. But usually Yahtzee could be kind of, I don't want to say dumbed down. It's still like a good, meaningful decision that you have to make of whether you want to play risky or whether you want to play it safe is a good this or that sort of decision point in the game.
Yeah, and then, a case where a game does have positional heuristics, that's something like Magic. Where Magic, when you're in the middle of a single match or single game of Magic, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, you do have a life total, right? That's like, okay, well, I have 20 life, my opponent has 20 life, but I might have 10 life and still be winning the game.
Yeah.
And my opponent has 20 or whatever. And so one of the really clear positional heuristics of Magic is what's called Who's the Beatdown. And this is sort of a method to determine, like, okay, well, who is winning the game currently? If things were to progress exactly as they are now and not change much, who is more likely to win the game?
To keep it, still in sort of general game design land, let's use Mario Kart as another quick example. Mario Kart, a very clear positional heuristics on the surface where it tells you who's in first place, second place, etc., all the way to 8th place. I think it's 8 players, 12 maybe.
A lot. What, last place?
I played a lot of Mario Kart 64. I think it's only 8 in that. But just because someone is like early in the game, in the race, just because someone is in first place does not necessarily mean that they're actually winning the game. They're technically currently in the lead, but anyone could know, the blue shell could come in out of nowhere. It could be thrown from the person in last place. It'll hit the person in first place immediately, and anyone within their vicinity will also get sort of knocked away. So what that can tell a higher skilled player that understands this sort of position is this person in second place might want to keep their distance from the person in first place because they know if they get hit with the blue shell, I don't also want to be hit by that.
And this has really interesting game design implications for Mario Kart because you don't necessarily want to get too far out ahead of the person who's in first. So it ends up being this really good tug of war all the way up to the last moment of Mario Kart, usually, because you're like, okay, well, if I'm in first place, I'm actually in the weakest position item-wise, but the best position race-wise, which is great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how game designers use heuristics, design heuristics for their games to help players learn how to play the game better. Zero-level heuristics are referring to sort of the first rule of thumb that players will learn. I like to talk about this as the like aha moment, right? Where like you can learn the rules to the game, but you don't really feel like you're playing the game yet until you have this like, oh, I get it moment.
It sort of ties very closely in with the meaningful decision of games, in that like the minute that the player has to make a particular decision, that has to be informed by something. And whatever is informing that decision is usually determined by some sort of combination of positional or directional heuristics.
Yeah, and for this example, I'm gonna talk about 3 different games. I'm gonna talk about chess, Go, and tic-tac-toe. And these are like the sort of
full spectrum of possibilities.
Right. This is like the easiest baseline examples of what we're talking about with 0-level heuristics. Let's start with Go. Go has really easy rules to learn. You have a board. You pick up a stone. All your stones are one color. It's either black or white, and you place a stone on the board.
The actions in Go, very simple.
Right. But the 0-level heuristic of Go is really difficult.
It's abysmal.
Yeah, it's like basically impossible to find. So like understanding how you're supposed to place a stone, I've been playing Go for quite a while now. I still don't really get it, right? Like, and I've heard Go even described that by people who play a lot of it as it's almost just a vibe. It's a feeling. You're like, oh, I want to place it here, and I'm looking at the patterns that are on the board, and I'm internalizing them as, oh, this is sort of where I should go. So on the other hand, we have chess, where chess has a little bit more complicated rules to learn in terms of how pieces move, but your 0-level heuristics can be based on how much each piece is worth, how many points each piece is worth.
In chess, it's very easy to tell someone, like, you win by checkmating the king, which you'll be removing pieces. Once you can remove the king, essentially, then you win the game. So it's very easy for someone to understand that concept from the very beginning.
Heuristics also sort of have a power scale. When we're referring to a powerful heuristic, what it means is if you understand the heuristic, you are much more likely to win the game versus if you don't understand it. And a weak heuristic is one that means you're slightly more likely to win the game by knowing it.
A good example of this in chess is that there's one particular pawn that you do not want to move on your side of the field because it opens up your king to be checkmated.
So like an
within,
instant checkmate?
I think it's like in the first 2 or 3 turns. And it's like one of the first bare bones things that beginners learn is like, don't move this pawn because someone could do this.
A really powerful heuristic is tic-tac-toe. The powerful 0-level heuristic in tic-tac-toe is that you always claim a corner space as your first move if you go first, and then if your opponent doesn't take the center. So if you go second, you always take the center. If you go first, you claim a corner. And if that happens, and then you just sort of trade back and forth with positions, it'll always end up in a tie game. That's an example of a 0-level heuristic that is too powerful. And what it means is that once a player knows it, the game sort of ceases to be a game because there's no uncertainty in outcome anymore. So let's talk a little bit about ways that designers can account or use heuristics to guide players into their games.
So let's continue using examples of like chess and Go and et cetera. Something that chess, I think, does in not a super effective way. It sort of has this like general. It's a very similar problem to what Magic has, which is that its positional heuristic is based off of the overall like general win condition. Right. That's the first thing is, am I close to winning? Am I not close to winning? And whether you win is taking one piece off the board. You could technically use all the other pieces on the board as an indicator of whether you're in the lead or not, but it's misleading, similar to Magic in life gain. In that, like, you could technically have more pieces on the board, but your opponent could still be winning. Yeah. And that's something it's a hurdle. It's not a bad thing to get over, but I think that the easier it is for a player to have a general understanding of what the actual overall goal is like key to starting out. Because I think this is where Go becomes so intimidating to new players, is that you just really don't have a good concept of like who's in the lead, who's not in the lead, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting is, and I think you're hitting on something really key for designers, is that giving players direct feedback on how they're doing in the game is important, but that creates an opportunity for you to reward your advanced players by knowing that, like, yeah, I might be in first place in Mario Kart. I might have 20 life while my opponent has 10. But there's more to it than that, is that my life total is a resource in Magic, for instance, that I can spend, depending upon what color I'm playing, to gain an advantage over my opponent without really suffering any consequences, because you get to the point where, okay, well, as long as I have one life, I'm still alive. So another thing that's important for like helping players develop heuristics is to chunk information. By chunking information, what I mean is that you are creating sort of categories of things to place different game pieces into, right? Where colors in Magic is the easiest example off the top of my head. Chess kind of does this too.
Chess
right?
does this too, yeah.
Where, you got the 5 colors of Magic. You have white, Wooburg, white, blue.
How many years have you played this game?
White,
you
blue.
Want me to open this box
white,
up
blue,
for you?
black.
Don't forget purple.
Red,
they added purple.
green. White, blue, black, green. But whatever. All right. So you got the 5 colors of Magic. I was trying to make sure I was saying them in the right order. I know what the colors are. It doesn't matter. Whatever. Okay. So, and each of those colors has access to certain strategies and things that they can do in the game. Like only blue has counter spells most of the time. Only black can directly destroy creatures most of the time. So this is why this sort of thing is really important to help teach new players the game, right? It helps them understand what the capabilities of their opponent are, and they can develop heuristics based on, okay, well, I see that color. I know that's what that color can do, and now I understand how to act.
Like you said, chess kind of does this. I think chess does this in a couple of ways that I think are interesting. One is it is upfront complexity, trying to teach what each individual piece does, but also any sort of game of chess when it starts out, it's usually the first 2 to 3 moves, and that is sort of the opening to any sort of game of chess. Mm-hmm. But those first
the Queen's Gambit.
That is a move. Yeah, that is.
I watched that show.
But generally, like how a game of chess starts is significantly simpler than what the middle of the game ends up looking like, right? And it's because your first moves can only be that you move a pawn 1 or 2 spaces, or you move one of your 2 knights. Right. And even then, your 2 knights can only move into 1 spot each, or 2 spots.
And it's an interesting way to chunk that information down for players, right? It's like there's a subset of moves that are the only legal moves that you can make right now, and the complexity grows, the possibility space grows as the game goes on. Where in something like Go,
you're in it.
It's it.
Right in the beginning. You can
put that stone anywhere you want. It's one of the reasons why when you're learning how to play Go, you play on a smaller board. Right. And then over time, you move up to the sort of professional size board.
And I think this is what's funny is because tic-tac-toe has a very similar, I think, like beginning problem that Go has, right? Where someone playing tic-tac-toe, there's way less spaces for you to put something. But in general, you could be like, I don't really know what would be best when you're starting out, so I'll just put it here in the center or whatever. But it's just that after enough, there's a very small few games that you'd have to play for you to start figuring out, okay, well, what is that strategy? And then once you realize it, it's just the best strategy to be going for.
So part of this conversation, I think, has to acknowledge that designers and players look at games differently. Heuristic, I don't think that players actively think that the game is teaching them heuristics. I think it's that they see these as things that they have uncovered. And often when players have conversations about games, they're talking about heuristics. And in some instances, these are emergent, right? That this is something that just sort of the player base found, and the designer didn't necessarily know that this was how the game was going to be played.
Sometimes, yeah.
But oftentimes designers are thinking about these things, and they're building systems that create these kinds of... this is almost like the unspoken rules, right? Where a designer has carefully created these particular things in their game to help players along, to help them discover how to play the game better, and move them into that intermediate player phase where things get a bit more complicated theoretically.
And hopefully there's, it depends on the style of game, but, depending on your player base, if you want to have a high skill ceiling, you're probably going to end up seeing more of these layers of heuristics added on. Yeah. And a lower skill ceiling might be something as simple, let's say, as the Mario Kart example. There's probably more to it than I'm understanding, but I'm not a big Mario Kart player. Right. But let's say that decision point of, do I want to be in first and get hit by the blue shell, or do I want to stay in second and then try to work past first or whatever to get ahead? Like, that's, I think, a pretty simple understanding and strategy of the situation. But the fact that they made the blue shell also affect nearby players, I think that is an interesting design decision that then creates an interesting decision for the second place and even potentially third place player to start to have this spatial management, right? It's not just, I'll just stay right behind this person. It's well, I have to have enough distance, but I still want to make sure I'm keeping my position in second. So I still need to turn corners when I should turn them to make sure I'm still sticking in my position and someone's not getting ahead of me and stuff like that. And so it adds that extra layer of, I guess, heuristics or understanding of what the strategy is. And
I think the most important thing here for designers is to understand that powerful heuristics are problematic. You might want some, but if a heuristic leads to strategic collapse, then that's when you have a really big problem.
Sure.
And this is usually one thing that I'll look for when I'm critiquing people's games is I'll look for, okay, well, you have this particular part of your action economy that is equating to 2 actions instead of 1, right? Everything else is 1 action, but if I continue to do this thing, I'm actually getting the benefit of 2 actions. So the heuristic is just do that.
Just do that thing. Yeah.
There was actually something that came up recently in the Discord where somebody shared a clip of the DBZ fighting game.
Oh, it's the newest one, Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero.
Okay, sure. So,
something like that.
And what happened in this tournament was that somebody went up and tapped their opponent once and then just flew away and just was able to avoid and never get hit again. And if the timer runs out, then the person who has more health wins. And so
that ends up being the strongest strategy is because you move so fast in the game that basically both players decided that this is the game at this high level of strategy. Currently, right, that could change. There's metas or whatever, but if that ends up being consistent, where that strategy just ends up being the best, then it's that's where the heuristics tree ends, right? Yeah. Technically, it could branch off, and it's okay, well, either you just go super fast and deal a little bit of damage and wait out the timer, or you do this other thing. But if this thing is just so powerful and so prominent, then this other branch just doesn't even exist. It
might as well not even exist.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting too is that players might interpret this as this is a way that min-maxers ruin the game, right? Min-maxers are going to uncover this stuff and then they're going to find the weak point and then the game is isn't fun anymore.
That's the game, baby.
Because that's what the game actually is at that point. Yeah. And I guess there's some truth to it, but I think that really, it's on the designer to have uncovered these things and designed redundancy and also enough variance to ensure that if this does happen, something like this does happen in your game, there's at least some kind of mechanism so that players can't always do it.
If you enjoyed our discussion talking about zero-level heuristics, please feel free to give us a little like and maybe a subscribe, maybe even a comment down below. Also, if you are interested in talking more with us and other people interested in the stuff that we talk about, you can join the Discord. You can find a link to that in the description of the video.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
See you in the next one.